So that's it for Drive Time for tonight. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Next is Jonathan Sharp with this week's edition of Business Matters, our news magazine on the world of business, when you get a chance to phone in questions on the issues of the day. And then it'll be time for Master Brain with another 3 contestants pitting their wits against each other and against the clock. So until tomorrow, it's bye for now.
Hello and welcome to Business Matters. Here once again with news and views on the latest topics of interest for the business community. Tonight we're going to concentrate on the world of reprographics, better known to you and me as photocopying and duplicating. We tend to take our office copiers for granted these days, and perhaps we underestimate the extent to which they have improved our efficiency and the quality of our documents over the years. The UK market for copiers is a highly competitive and some might even say cutthroat business, and the vendors are constantly looking for differentiating factors, whether it's price, new machine features or whatever. The important piece of news that's prompted us to take a closer look at this business is the announcement by Xerox, who are the market leader and of course the company that originated the whole xerographic technology, of a new copier within their range called the 5065. Now I've got with me in the studio Mike Johnson from Xerox and Peter Doherty of OPAC, the Office Products Advisory Council. And they're going to discuss, well, some of these issues, and then we'll be taking your calls with any questions you may have. So first, if I can start with you, Mike. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about this new copier, the Xerox 5065.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, the important thing about the 5065 is that although it's a new model, it's very much an evolution from the 1065, which is one of the most successful and popular machines Xerox has ever produced. Like the 1065, it's a mid-volume copier producing 62 copies a minute, and it will have a very broad marketplace indeed.
So what's different about it?
Well, I was just coming to that. What we've actually done is to take on board all the feedback that we've had from customers about the 1065 over the last couple of years and refine the machine features to reflect the customer's requirements even more closely. So on top of all the existing very advanced features of the 1065, we've added the advantages of an improved layout for the machine top to expand the work area, a connection capability to third-party control devices, an increased output tray capacity from 300 to 500, an increased Auditron capacity as standard, and an external stapler. The most important thing, though, is that the 5065 incorporates a system we call RIC, which is short for Remote Interactive Communication, and this really does herald a new era in copier technology.
What actually is RIC then, Mike? I mean, what makes it so revolutionary?
Well, what happens is that the 5065 incorporates a highly intelligent microchip, which monitors all the key functions of the machine on a continuous basis. This is linked via a telephone line to a central computer located at the local Xerox service centre, and if it detects any potential problems, it sends the data to the computer for further analysis. If necessary, the computer will generate an alert for an engineer to schedule a service call before the malfunction actually happens.
What do you see as the main advantages this gives to customers?
Well, clearly, if the service engineer can call to rectify a potential problem before the machine actually breaks down, then it means that productivity is kept at a maximum. What's more, the call can be scheduled for a time that's most convenient for the customer. And because the data will often indicate exactly what the problem is with the machine, the engineer will know what parts to bring, so he won't have to make a second call.
Well, on the face of it, that all sounds pretty impressive stuff, but I would imagine that RIC, as you call it, is a fairly expensive system to install. So how much does it end up costing the customer?
Well, this is the really good news, because effectively RIC is free to the customer. All they have to pay for is the installation and rental of the telephone line or an extension with direct dial capability and calls to their local service centre. RIC is an integral part of the 5065, and the machine price, we think, compares very favourably with so-called competitive machines that don't have the feature.
OK, well, we've heard the Xerox story on their new 5065. Now let's turn now to Peter Doherty to look at it from the potential customer's viewpoint. Now, Peter, what's your view of this area of the market?
Well, I'd certainly echo what you said earlier, in that this mid-volume segment is increasingly competitive, and we've seen the Japanese companies starting to address the need for more productive and durable products in decentralized walk-up environments, as well as offer some gimmicky but not necessarily practical features. Xerox have done extremely well over the years with the 1065. I can quite understand them sticking with a winning formula. Now, there's no doubt that even though it's pretty much the same as the 1065, which has been around for a while now, in terms of xerographic technology, the 5065 still represents a state-of-the-art machine, with the added benefit, of course, of a proven track record.
How important do you think the RIC service diagnostic system will be? Is that something that customers are likely to be interested in?
Well, I think like a lot of new technology, even though its benefits are fairly obvious, some people are bound to be a bit suspicious of it at first. And I think the extent to which it catches on straight away will be down to the quality of the presentation that the Xerox salespeople give it. Having said that, you really have to recognise it as a key differentiating factor that Xerox have against the competition. And in a market like this, where, as I said, things are getting very tight, something like RIC that gives very clear benefits in terms of machine uptime and productivity ought to give Xerox the opportunity to pull away ahead of the competition.
How long do you think it will be before other vendors offer something similar to RIC?
Well, I can see Mike wanting to jump in there, so I'll say it for him. With the way most vendors operate, that is through dealers, it's very unlikely that they would be able to operate anything like the RIC system. What RIC depends on is a direct relationship between the customer and a central computer at the service centre. And of course, with Rank Xerox, the direct service relationship is well established. Dealers would be very reluctant to relinquish customer contacts and their own maintenance deals to a central point. That's something that Xerox really ought to make the most of.
Is that the point you were going to make, Mike?
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself, Peter. And building, as we are, on a very solid reliability record with the 1065, the potential of the 5065 with RIC to deliver a very high level of customer satisfaction is, I think, pretty clear. And we intend to take full advantage of it.
OK, well, we're going to open the phone lines now for you to call in with any questions you've got or any points you want to make on this subject, and we'll try and deal with them. While we're waiting for the first calls, can I pose a more general question for you to deal with, which really relates to the whole office systems market, of which copiers like the 5065 are just a part? We heard a lot a few years ago about the paperless office and how electronic communication would make ordinary hard copy documents obsolete. And yet here we are in the 90s and still we use mountains of paper. What happened to those predictions? What do you think, Peter?
Oh, well, I think that those pundits simply underestimated the way that people enjoy the sheer convenience of paper documents in their businesses. What's happened is that systems vendors like Xerox have recognised this and have developed ways that people can manage and produce better quality documents more efficiently. They've done this with hardware and software developments that give customers more flexibility and even greater capability in document creation and publishing. The development of the 5065 with RIC is an indication of how much the real leading companies like Rank Xerox are responding to and, in some cases, actually leading customer requirements.
Yes, and that's an interesting point, Peter, and I think we may come back to it in more detail in a future programme. In the meantime, I think we've got our first caller. Yes, and it's Martin calling from Slough. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Hello.
Hello, Martin, and what's your question?
Well, I was listening to what the guy from Rank Xerox was saying about the 5065, and it strikes me that it's not really a new machine at all. And all they've done is what some of the other companies do, and tart up the old model with a few new features, give it a new number, and try and kid people it's a new product and hope nobody notices.
Oh, pretty strong stuff there, Martin. Well, I take it you're involved in this business yourself, one way and another?
Well, sort of. I mean, I look after all the equipment for the firm I work for, so I kind of make it my business to stay in touch with things, if you know what I mean.
Well, yes, Martin, I think I do. Now, Mike, I'm sure you've got some comments to make.
Yes. Although, actually, you may be surprised that I'm not about to explode with rage at the comment, because in many ways it's quite an understandable reaction, and it's one that at a sales level we're going to have to respond effectively to. One of the problems with what our competitors do in revamping old machines is that they increase the rated capability of a copier without actually improving the engine or the technology in any way. With the 5065, we're not making any new claims for it. We deliberately aren't changing the spec because it's a very successful formula and it reflects customer needs very powerfully. The technology incorporated in the 1065 and maintained in the 5065 was way ahead of its time when it was first introduced, and it's still the most advanced xerographic technology. Aside from that, though, I'd say that RIC undoubtedly is a revolutionary aspect, and for that alone I think the new model number and launch is justified.
Any comments from you, Peter?
Oh, not a lot to add, really, Jonathan. I think Mike's position is a pretty reasonable one, in that this really is a very different case from some of the so-called upgrading exercises we've seen, where a manufacturer, for example, is simply asking an engine that was built to deliver 56 copies a minute suddenly to be able to do 80, and the results of that are inevitable. Where I would also go along with him is that the Xerox sales force will need to be clued up about the strengths of the 1065 and the implications of RIC, so that they can present the 5065 in the right sort of light.
OK, well, I think that deals with Martin's point. Who's our next caller?
Hello, my name's Derek.
And where are you calling from, Derek?
From Croydon.
OK, well, it's Derek from Croydon. And what's your question?
Well, I've heard you going on about the 5065 and how it's a very advanced machine, but you've not mentioned colour. Does that mean that it doesn't do colour?
I assume that by colour, Derek, you mean highlight colour. Not that it matters a great deal, because no, you're absolutely right, the 5065 doesn't have that feature.
Well, how can you call it an advanced machine if it doesn't have colour capability?
Well, all I can say to that is that, as I said earlier, the 5065 very much represents a response to feedback from customers about what they want their copiers to do. And our research says that although highlight colour can seem on the face of it quite an attractive option, there's only about 2 or 3% of the marketplace that it's got any relevance for. So it's not a feature that we see as having the importance of questions of reliability and genuine productivity and the ability to handle the kind of jobs our customers actually want done.
Yeah, as a matter of interest, Derek, what sort of jobs would you want to use colour for?
Well, I'm not sure, really. I haven't really thought that much about it. It's just that some people I see make such a big deal about it.
There is one other point about the colour feature which I think people can easily lose sight of, which is that using the colour feature can add dramatically to copy cost because it involves so much extra copy volume, and that can very rapidly detract from whatever value it might seem to have.
OK, Derek. Well, I think that just about covers it. So on to our next question, and this time I think we've got Maureen. Yes, it's Maureen on the line.
Yes, hello, that's right.
Good evening, Maureen, and how can we help?
Well, I've had Canon photocopiers for a number of years now, and I've been reasonably happy with them. But I'm interested in what you've been saying about the Xerox 5065 being based on the 1065 and how successful that's been. But you've not actually said why it's so popular and what sort of features it's got. So I wondered if you could give some of the details about it so I can tell if it's different from my Canon.
Fair point, Maureen, and I'm sure Mike will be delighted to help.
Yeah, fine. As a matter of interest, Maureen, what Canon machine do you have?
It's an 8580, I think.
Yes, well, that's very interesting because, of course, that is one of the machines that's a direct competitor to the 1065, so it's a good basis for comparison. Well, the first point I'd make refers back to what we said to the first caller about machine upgrades. The 8580 is actually an upgrade from the 7550, so it's the same system being asked to do 80 copies a minute rather than 50 without reliability problems. So if we look at the 1065 and, of course, the 5065, we can start to identify the reasons why it's proved so popular, and mainly it's down to simple questions of productivity, reliability, and really useful practical features. The 1065's reliability record is second to none, which obviously supports its productivity. And unlike your Canon, it retains its rated output speed when it's doing more complex tasks like duplexing. But there are other things as well that give it tremendous versatility. I mean, for example, take document finishing. Whereas the Canon can only take up to 80 grams stock and only do front covers, the 1065 and 5065 can take up to 200 gram card for front and back covers. And the 1065 can handle A2 originals and computer fanfold stationery, neither of which the Canon takes. Plus, it has a much bigger output capability because of the RDH. It's also got the 2,300 sheet paper capacity with auto tray switching, the facility to staple up to 999 sets, and on the 5065, as I said earlier, a 500 sheet output tray. On top of all this solid capability, it's also very easy to operate because of the interactive message displays that show you how to use all the features. I mean, I could go on, but the basic message is that the 1065 has a very high level of capability, and that's what's made it a very popular machine.
Peter, you wanted to say something, I think.
Yes, well, all I wanted to say was to remind everybody that, of course, the 1065 has been voted the best buy in its category in What to Buy for Business magazine for the last 3 years. And obviously that very much reflects the way that customers feel about the products. My feeling is that there's no better yardstick than genuine customer satisfaction. And although I'm aware that Rank Xerox use this phrase in their advertising, the real crunch is whether the strategy actually works or not.
Thank you, Peter. Is that okay for you, Maureen?
Yes, fine. Thanks very much. There is one other thing you might clarify if there's time.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead.
Well, you've mentioned a couple of times about the Xerox machines being state-of-the-art technology and how they're different technology from other makes, so they're more reliable. What exactly do you mean by that?
Right. Well, this is a bit technical, but here goes, because it is quite a significant point. When it was introduced, the 1065 incorporated a newly patented technology which we call haze development. What this does is create a toner cloud over the complete image, and that gives an even density of coverage. The result is a very high level and consistency of copy quality. Canon use a different technology with a single component developer toner, and using this technology inevitably leads to a higher level of machine contamination, and this of course is directly related to the number of service calls generated. The 5065 maintains the use of haze development technology, which is still very much the leading edge in xerographic terms, with, as I've said, all the quality and reliability benefits.
Thanks, Mike and Maureen. Now let's take our next call. Hello, it's David from Swindon, is that right?
Hello, yes. Look, you were talking earlier about this remote interactive communications. Or whatever it is. Anyway, Rick, I think you called it. And there's one big thing I'm still not clear about, because you said that it's free and doesn't cost the customer anything. Now, I find that hard to believe. Surely there's a catch, like extra service charges or something? I mean, how can Rank Xerox afford to put a system like that in for nothing?
Right. Well, a bit of a doubting Thomas there. And Peter, you seem anxious to answer David's point.
Yes, well, this is something that I was intrigued about when I first heard about Rick, so I went into it in a bit more depth with the Xerox guys, and the answer is actually very simple. The point is that as well as making things a whole lot more efficient for the customer, Rick also makes life simpler for the Rank Xerox service people. If they can organise their service calls based on a prior knowledge of what's likely to go wrong with a machine, and without the pressure of just reacting to emergencies, it saves a lot of unnecessary calls and wasted man-hours. And because of this, the full service and maintenance agreement for the 5065 is actually cheaper.
Have you got anything to add to that, Mike?
Well, no, not really. I think that sums it up very neatly. It's all very much a part of the investment in customer satisfaction from our point of view.
OK, well, then does that answer your question, David?
Yes, fine, thank you. Goodbye.
And Tom, I think, for just one more call. What's your question, caller?
Yes, I'm looking for a new copier for our office, and obviously I've been listening to what you've been saying about the 5065, and I was wondering if you could tell me if you think it would suit our particular requirements.
OK, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Oh, sorry, it's Colin.
OK, Colin, just a couple of questions first. Could you give me some indication of your volumes and copying requirements?
Yes, well, we're a small firm of accountants, so the bulk of our work is things like company reports and accounts, that sort of thing.
OK, and what sort of volume do you do?
Oh, I suppose most reports are about 30 pages each, and we produce about 800 sets a month, so if you add the general use, we reckon to do around 30,000 copies a month, I suppose.
Right. It's just one other question. Can you tell me where the material for the reports is gathered from?
Well, it's a combination of documents, really, mainly from our WP, but some of the information comes from spreadsheets and from computer printouts.
OK, that's fine, but we really do need to know a customer's work profile before we can decide what machine to recommend. You'd be amazed how many people get a copier without analysing exactly what they're going to use it for. Given your work profile, I'd say that the 5065 would be a product that could not only handle your work, but could well also improve the overall presentation of your documents and speed of production. Let me explain. Firstly, It could take the computer printouts and automatically reduce and print selected pages in an A4 format. Your reports can then be produced using these copies as originals, together with the output from your WP system. By using the recirculating document handler, the 5065 will produce completed reports at a constant 62 copies a minute, and they can also incorporate covers up to 200-gram card for added impact.
Well, that sounds okay, but 62 copies a minute isn't really amazingly fast, and we've often got really tight deadlines to meet.
Yeah, I don't think you need worry too much on that score, because the way the 5065 is designed makes it highly productive. And although there are machines that claim a higher rated speed of output, the 5065 often outperforms them in terms of genuine job completion time. The reason for this is the components of the 5065 have been designed as integral units, and it means that it can maintain the rated speed throughout the job, even when you're using some of the more sophisticated features. On top of this, the incorporation of RIC will maximize the availability of the machine, in that the likelihood of the machine breaking down and the customer having to wait for the engineer to call is significantly reduced. So I don't think you'd have a problem with your deadlines. And obviously, for companies with similar requirements in other market sectors, the 5065 will be just as valid a choice. Is that helpful?
Oh, yes, fine. Thanks very much indeed.
Right, and I think that's about enough of your sales pitch for the moment, Mike. But thanks to all our callers tonight, and thanks to our studio guests, Mike Johnson and Peter Doherty. We'll be back next week with another edition of Business Matters.
Later tonight, we'll bring you Night Moves with the best in late-night sounds. Before that, though, it's time for Master Brain.
Good evening, and welcome to tonight's edition of Master Brain. With me in the studio, I have three contestants who, as usual, are going to pit their wits against each other, answering questions on a specialist subject of their own choice. So, without further ado, let's introduce our first contestant. Your name, please.
Andrew Sharp.
And your specialist subject?
The rank Xerox 5065 Copier.
You have 1 minute on the Xerox 5065 Copier, starting from now. What is the capacity of the output tray on the Xerox 5065?
500 sheets.
Correct. Give 3 additional features of the 5065 over the 1065.
RIC, offline stapler and foreign interface as standard.
Correct. What connections are required at the installation of the 5065?
A telephone point and main power socket.
Correct. What volume band does the 5065 operate within?
25 to 75k copies
Correct.
per month.
In what configuration is the 5065 available?
There are 2 versions, the recirculatory document handler and finisher and the RDH and offsetting catch tray.
Correct. What is the recommended maximum copy paperweight that can be used from any of the paper trays?
80 gram.
No, sorry. It's 120 GSM for standard copy paper and up to 200 GSM for covers. What are the 3 special features available on the control panel?
Margin shift, computer forms feeding and covers.
Correct. How many jobs can be pre-programmed and how do you access this feature?
9 and... pass.
What are the minimum and maximum sizes for originals and copies?
Any size up to A2 for originals and A5 to A3 for copies.
Correct. What is the maximum size that can be duplexed? And you may answer.
A4.
I'm sorry, the answer is B4. Well, at the end of that round, you've scored 7 with 1 pass. The question you passed on was, how many jobs can be pre-programmed and how do you access this feature? The answer was 9, and you use P30 to access this feature. Thank you very much. And now our next contestant, please. Your name?
Clive Robinson.
And your specialist subject?
Remote interactive communication.
You have 1 minute on remote interactive communication starting from now. What is remote interactive communication otherwise known as?
RIC.
Correct. How does RIC operate?
It continuously monitors the copier's performance and alerts service of any deterioration in performance.
Correct. Who else can offer a RIC facility?
Only Rank Xerox offer the RIC facility in the UK, although Kodak have announced they will introduce a system called Teleassist in Europe during 1991.
Correct. What products offer RIC?
Currently 1090 and 5065.
Correct. What is the RIC footprint on the 5065?
Pass.
How much does RIC cost?
RIC is free to customers on a full service and maintenance agreement. They only have to pay for the installation of the phone line and the cost of the telephone calls.
Correct. Approximately how many calls does the RIC system make in 1 month?
8?
No, between 2 and 3. How many levels of alert does the 5065 generate and what are they?
Pass.
How does the offering of RIC benefit rank Xerox?
By enabling the engineer's workload to be more balanced due to the ability to predict calls, or it enables the engineer to operate in a more structured manner due to the ability to predict calls.
Correct. How does RIC benefit the customer?
By offering increased availability and service at a mutually convenient time.
Correct. Can rank Xerox gain access to confidential information via RIC? And you may answer.
No.
Correct. And at the end of that round, you have scored 8 and passed on 2. The first was, what is the RIC footprint? And the answer, of course, is the ability of the 5065 to establish a usage profile, which is then used when deciding when to generate an alert. And the second was, how many levels of alert does the 5065 generate and what are they? There are, in fact, 3 levels. Level 1 indicates a hard failure, Level 2, failure in 2 to 5,000 copies, and Level 3, a repeated fault which will lead to failure. Thank you. And now, could we have our last contestant? Your name, please.
Brian Chalmers.
And your specialist subject?
Copiers in the 25,000 to 75,000 copy volume band.
You have 1 minute on mid-volume copiers starting from now. Give 3 products that fit the 25 to 75k copy volume band.
The Canon 8580, the Xerox 5065 and the Ricoh 7770.
Correct. What are the key strengths of the Canon 8580?
It's got high speed, 80 copies a minute, improved productivity and a folder option for the A3.
Correct. Give 3 key weaknesses of Canon 8580.
Limited paperweight capacity, poor productivity in duplex mode, and it's got no interactive help.
Correct. Can the Canon 8580 feed covers, and if so, what weight?
Yes, it can, but only front covers and 120 GSM.
No, sorry, the maximum weight is only 80 GSM. What is the operating speed of the Canon 8580 when producing 1 set of 10 originals?
80 copies a minute.
No, that's incorrect. The speed is limited by the ADH, which only runs at 62 CPM. Which product does Kodak use to face off against the Xerox 5065?
The Kodak 90, which is a badged Canon 6650.
Correct. What is the key difference between the Xerox 5065 and its competitors?
It's overall productivity and RIC.
Correct. Name 2 strengths of the Ricoh 7770.
A3, productivity due to the 17-inch processor width, and its total paper capacity of 3,700 sheets with the optional paper tray.
Correct. Does the Ricoh 7770 have pre-programmed job capability?
Yes, it does, with the optional menu card reader.
What are the operating speeds... I've started, so I'll finish. What are the operating speeds of the Ricoh 7770?
64 copies a minute from the Platinum and 50 from the handler.
No, I'm sorry, it's 64 copies per minute in the Platinum, but it's only 39 using the handler. Well, at the end of that round, you've scored 7 with no passes. Thank you, Mr. Chalmers. So, if we look at the scores, we can see that the winner this week with 8 points is Mr. Clive Robinson. It only remains for me to thank our contestants for taking part and invite you to join us for our next edition of Masterbrain.
Okay, thanks for staying with us. Now it's time for Night Moves. Music all through the night.
Well, do you hear what I'm saying? You don't have to worry. You got documents to copy and you want them in a hurry. You want them double-sided, you want them with covers. Well, that's no problem, cause let me tell you, brother, there's a new machine. It's the best there is alive. It's called the Xerox 5065. Got a feature called RIC. The latest innovation means remote interactive communication. RIC gives you service with no aggravation, cause it monitors your copy from a remote station. Before your machine's got a chance to go wrong, the service engineer will be right along. If productivity is what you need, it does 62 a minute with an automatic feed. With simple instructions on the message display, anyone can walk up and use it right away. So stick your Canon, Kodak or the others. Just want the 5065, let's hear it, brothers! Yeah, 5065, the RIC rap, RIC rap. Yeah, that's the fact.